Your mind never fully rests. It constantly races through a million different scenarios, leaving you feeling completely emotionally exhausted before the day has even truly begun. Even small emotions start feeling overwhelming. A simple conversation or a minor shift in someone's tone can suddenly send a massive shockwave of anxiety straight through your chest. You overthink every single connection. Instead of simply enjoying the moment, your brain frantically analyzes every word and glance, desperately searching for hidden signs of rejection. And slowly, people feel farther away. No matter how physically close someone tries to get to you, an invisible, thick wall of fog keeps them at a completely safe distance. Something inside you feels fundamentally exhausted. The constant, draining effort required to read the room and anticipate danger has completely depleted all of your emotional reserves. It feels like your thoughts never stop moving. You are trapped in an endless, dizzying loop of self-doubt, making it incredibly difficult to find a single moment of genuine peace. Your mind keeps frantically searching for safety. You subconsciously scan every interaction for potential threats, preparing yourself for abandonment long before anything actually goes wrong. But closeness quickly starts feeling dangerous. The very warmth and intimacy you secretly crave immediately trigger an overwhelming emotional urge to flee before you can be hurt. So you slowly, quietly pull away. You retreat into your safe isolation, confusing the people who care about you as your true self fades behind a completely guarded surface. Even when you never meant to push them away, it is not a conscious, malicious choice to be distant, but rather an automatic survival instinct taking over your overwhelmed heart. Because your heart learned protection the hard way. Past letdowns and broken trusts taught you that shrinking into the background is much safer than standing fully in the light. And over time, that desperate protection slowly became permanent distance. The heavy knots of anxiety in your chest tightened, closing you off from the genuine love trying to reach you. You begin to feel emotionally far away from everyone. It is as if you are standing completely alone in a massive, empty room, watching the rest of the world interact from a safe distance. Even around the people you love the most, you can be sitting right next to your closest friends, yet still feel a quiet, expanding fracture separating your true feelings from theirs. You completely stop feeling understood. You hide your authentic self behind a careful, blurry facade, convinced that if they truly saw your messy inner world, they would inevitably leave. And slowly, this heavy loneliness becomes deeply familiar. You adjust to the vast, empty isolation, convincing yourself that being entirely alone is simply the way you're meant to live. Absolute silence starts feeling much safer than speaking up. It is far easier to sit alone with an empty chair than to risk opening your heart and feeling misunderstood or rejected again. Even when your heart still desperately wants connection, sometimes your heart pulls away before you even realize it, not because you do not care, but because your mind became tired of surviving emotional pain. You started feeling emotionally distant. Slowly, without really trying to, you found yourself pulling away from the people you care about, retreating into a vast and silent space. Even in places filled with people, you could be sitting in a crowded room with your closest friends, yet still feel as isolated as a single cup left completely on its own. You stopped feeling fully seen. It was as if your true self was slowly dissolving into a thick fog, making it impossible for anyone to genuinely reach or understand you. So you became quieter. You learned to suppress your needs and shrink your voice, casting a long, lonely shadow over the vibrant life you were actually meant to live. Your emotions became harder to explain. The inner spark that used to drive your connections faded to a dim flicker, making it exhausting to even try putting your feelings into words. And easier to hide. It became so much simpler to walk away down an empty, desolate path than to stand your ground and risk the painful vulnerability of opening up. You began carrying loneliness silently, like a small, heavy stone dropped in the middle of a massive white room. The profound isolation became a quiet, permanent fixture in your daily life. Wondering why closeness feels exhausting, you look at your fractured, blurry reflection and ask yourself why loving others and letting them love you always seems to drain every ounce of your energy. Why trust feels uncomfortable. Getting close to someone feels incredibly risky, as if you are trying to navigate a thick, unpredictable fog where you could be betrayed at any given moment. Why connection feels unsafe. Every potential relationship looks like an empty road leading toward an unclear, dangerous horizon, making you want to turn around before the journey even begins. Your heart became guarded quietly. Without making any grand declarations, you just slowly closed the doors, shrinking away from the light to ensure nobody could ever catch you off guard. Not cold. People might mistake your quiet isolation for a harsh, unfeeling exterior. But the absolute truth is that your heart is not made of ice or indifference. Just tired. You are completely and utterly exhausted from the constant, invisible battle of trying to figure out who is actually safe enough to let into your life. Tired of disappointment. Every time you bravely opened up in the past, it resulted in another painful crack in your soul, leaving you weary of hoping for anything different. Tired of emotional pain. Walking away and letting your footprints fade into nothingness feels far more appealing than staying and risking another devastating heartbreak. So distance became protection. You deliberately wrapped yourself in a massive, empty white space, trading genuine human connection for a guaranteed shield against any future letdowns. Even if it also became loneliness, you managed to stop the chaotic, painful ripples of rejection, but the stillness that replaced it was heavy, hollow, and profoundly empty. Because loneliness feels safer, the predictable, quiet ache of being entirely on your own is much easier to manage than the sudden, sharp sting of a broken promise. Then being hurt again. Fading into the distant fog ensures that nobody can ever get close enough to strike those delicate, wounded places inside your heart a second time. But your heart still quietly hopes for peace. Despite the massive walls and the endless distance, a tiny, distant light proves you still desperately long for a place to finally rest. Your heart learned to expect pain. After being let down so many times, stepping forward feels like walking blindly into an uncertain fog, waiting for the next disappointment. So it stopped opening easily. You carefully lock the deepest parts of your soul away behind a heavy, closed door, refusing to let anyone get close enough to hurt you again. Because disappointment leaves invisible cracks. Every broken promise and harsh word fractured your trust, leaving you feeling like fragile pottery, constantly trying to hold yourself together. Past pain completely changed how you trust people. You watch connections slowly fade away like footprints in the fog, convinced that eventually everyone you care about will walk out of your life. Some wounds never felt fully healed. The memories of past betrayal remain like torn paper inside your mind, a jagged reminder of the times your vulnerability was deeply mishandled. So your true emotions became much harder to express. It felt safer to simply erase your own thoughts and feelings than to risk sharing them and being entirely misunderstood. And eventually, vulnerability began feeling entirely unsafe. Navigating relationships started to feel like walking a terrifyingly narrow path, where one wrong step could lead to emotional devastation. Your strength slowly became deep emotional exhaustion. Trying to keep your guard up day after day melted away your energy, leaving you incredibly tired of always having to be the strong one. You started protecting yourself automatically. Without even realizing it, your heart chose to travel a shadowed, lonely road just to avoid the agonizing uncertainty of letting someone in. Not because you actually wanted this isolation. Deep down, the warm light of your true self still flickers through the cracks, quietly, desperately hoping to finally be seen and cherished. But because fear slowly became your only method of survival, the anxiety of being hurt again wrapped around you like tangled roots, firmly keeping you stuck in place. Your heart learned the habit of distance slowly. The moment you sense genuine warmth or closeness, your immediate reflex is to turn around and quietly fade back into the shadows. Even while you were secretly hoping someone would finally stay, you look out at the unclear horizon, praying that just one person might be patient enough to break through your thickest walls. Because all that pain does not simply remove your deep need for love. Beneath the cracked and hardened surface of your defenses, your soul is still crying out for true connection. It only changes how safe that love actually feels. The turbulent anxiety inside your chest needs a steady, unconditional warmth to finally calm those overwhelming ripples of fear. And Jesus perfectly understands that hidden, paralyzing fear. As his gentle presence draws near, the heavy fog of anxiety begins to thin, making the path ahead feel just a little less terrifying. He clearly sees the deep pain hidden behind your walls. He recognizes that your defensive distance is not anger, but simply a profound, exhausted terror of being emotionally abandoned. He hears the desperate fear beneath your heavy silence. His divine grace reaches into the darkest places, gently pouring warm, healing light over every single crack and shattered piece of your heart. And he absolutely does not walk away from guarded hearts. When everyone else gives up on your distance, he stands calmly and patiently, proving that his safe love is here to stay. Because true healing finally begins where your fear no longer has to hide. Embraced by his relentless, warm light, your weary soul can finally step out of the shadows and rest. Jesus is not afraid of your walls. He does not view your carefully built defenses as a challenge or an insult, but perfectly understands they were constructed to protect a very fragile heart. He understands why they were built. He knows the history of your hidden pain and the painful betrayals that force you to retreat into silent isolation just to survive. He sees the pain underneath them. While the rest of the world might only see your quiet distance, his gentle, uncritical gaze pierces completely through the armor to find the wounded soul beneath. And he moves closer, gently, without making any sudden movements or demanding that you immediately open up. His warm presence simply arrived to dispel the terrifying fog of your isolation. Not with pressure. Healing your heart is a delicate process, like a calm, steady ripple slowly smoothing out the disturbed, anxious waters of your constantly overthinking mind. Not with shame. He never makes you feel guilty for needing extra time to build trust. Instead, he stands faithfully beside your guarded heart with nothing but endless, unwavering compassion. But with presence, slowly the cold, isolated, empty spaces you have lived in for so long begin to fill with a comforting, radiant warmth that absolutely refuses to leave. Because healing begins where safety exists. When you finally realize you are not going to be abandoned again, your trembling hands can finally open entirely to receive love. Your heart slowly stops surviving. The deep, tangled roots of anxiety and self-protection that kept you firmly stuck in place finally begin to release their incredibly heavy grip and starts learning peace. The terrifying, narrow path ahead becomes wonderfully clear, brightly illuminated by the gentle, constant reassurance of his divine companionship. Little by little, the broken pieces are restored as the deep, invisible cracks left by past disappointments are tenderly filled with the golden, healing light of his unwavering grace. Your distance softens. The blurry, faded version of yourself that you used to hide behind washes away entirely, allowing your true, beautiful identity to confidently emerge. Your fear loosens. The thick, suffocating mist of uncertainty clears completely away, revealing a calm, expansive landscape where your soul is finally free to rest. And your heart breathes again. The tight, anxious knot in your chest completely unravels, replaced by a steady, comforting glow that promises you are entirely secure. Because safe love stays. It never runs away at the first sign of your hesitation. Instead, it sits quietly beside you in the silence, perfectly honoring your delicate pace. Even when healing takes time, there is no rushed timeline or urgent deadline, just the gentle daily renewal of a calm sunrise, reflecting beautifully across perfectly still water. Jesus does not force your heart open. He totally respects the heavy locks you placed on the door, choosing instead to gently let his warm light slip softly underneath the frame. He waits patiently beside it. He simply remains in the quiet, offering his steadfast devotion until you feel courageous enough to slowly open the door yourself. Until trust slowly returns. The terrifying boundaries of your isolated world gently expand, revealing a breathtaking, peaceful horizon filled entirely with endless possibility. Because you were never meant to carry fear alone, walking this calm path alongside his reassuring presence reminds you that divine companionship is your ultimate shield. Your soul was created for peace. You are meant to feel as wonderfully light and completely unburdened as a delicate feather floating freely on a warm, restoring breeze. Not constant survival. You can finally lay down your defensive armor and just exist, perfectly held in the absolute stillness of a brand new, beautiful, and hopeful dawn. And healing begins the moment your heart feels safe. Standing quietly together in the light, the agonizing dread of abandonment is gone, replaced entirely by perfect acceptance. Because Jesus restores guarded hearts gently, immersed in his magnificent, soft divine light, your weary soul is securely guided out of the lonely darkness and completely brought back to life. Healing often begins quietly. There are no sudden fireworks or dramatic shifts, just a very soft, patient light slowly spreading through the darkest parts of your lingering fog. In places nobody else can see, deep inside your spirit, The hidden fractures and invisible wounds left by disappointment start to mend as they are filled softly with a warm, restorative golden light. Your mind slowly stops fighting itself. The overwhelming waves of anxiety and constant overthinking begin to settle, allowing the once disturbed water of your thoughts to gradually calm into absolute stillness. And your heart begins breathing again. As the heavy mist of fear clears completely away from your landscape, you finally feel the incredibly relieving freedom to just take a deep breath, because peace slowly returns. The dull gray emptiness that once consumed your daily life is gently washed away as vibrant color slowly starts returning to your entirely restored world. Fear loosens its extremely tight grip. The deep, tangled roots of survival and self-protection that kept you firmly stuck in place finally release, freeing you to step confidently forward. Not because life suddenly becomes perfectly easy, but because his calm, steadfast presence stands with you in the fog, providing an undeniable sense of safety amidst the uncertainty. But because you no longer have to carry everything entirely alone, a warm, steady glow brightens inside your chest, reminding you that divine strength is beautifully lifting your heavy burdens. Your fiercely guarded walls slowly begin to soften. The thick, invisible barriers you built for protection are gently dissolving into soft, flowing textures, no longer needed to keep the world away. Your soul slowly, cautiously opens again. As the heavy darkness of your past fades beautifully beneath the brilliant light of a new sunrise, you feel completely ready to embrace genuine connection. And true healing begins changing exactly how you feel. Instead of expecting sudden pain, a deeply calming ripple spreads across your heart, bringing an unexpected but completely welcome sense of serenity. It changes how you think. The chaotic, spinning circles of anxious thoughts are entirely replaced by absolute clarity as you stand completely peacefully inside a warm, expanding, and protective light. It changes exactly how you see yourself. The broken, unworthy reflection washes away, allowing your true, beautiful identity to flourish like a peaceful landscape, slowly filling entirely with vibrant new colors. You realize that even the most broken places can fully heal. The shattered pieces of your past are not thrown away, but tenderly restored and held perfectly together with soft, radiant, golden light. Because Jesus restores your guarded heart so incredibly gently. Standing right beside you, his soft, reassuring presence guides your eyes entirely away from the past and toward a completely calm, hopeful horizon. Not through heavy pressure or forced timelines. The intimidating fog simply disappears from the open path before you, naturally revealing the beautiful journey ahead at the absolute perfect pace. But through a profound peace that actually stays. You can finally let go of your tightly clenched fists, allowing your open hands to rest entirely peacefully in the healing, warm, and unending sunlight. And your wounded heart slowly, beautifully learns safety again. Standing entirely free and completely without emotional barriers, you realize that being completely vulnerable no longer means you're about to be destroyed. Little by little, the terrifying world you once hid from transforms. It gently becomes a glowing, magnificent horizon, expanding beautifully and inviting you into a life completely free from fear. Until true healing becomes completely real inside you, surrounded entirely by a vast open landscape filled with warm, restorative divine light, your weary soul finally, absolutely knows it is perfectly safe. Peace feels unfamiliar at first. When you have spent your entire life bracing for the next storm, the sudden stillness of the water can almost feel completely disorienting. Because your heart spent so long surviving, you carried the heavy weight of constant vigilance for years, never allowing yourself to be as light and unburdened as a floating feather. But slowly, your mind becomes quieter. The chaotic mental noise that used to deafen you gently drifts away entirely, carried off by a peaceful, soothing breeze. Your thoughts stop racing constantly. Instead of eagerly anticipating every possible disaster, you can finally look up and simply exist under a vast, beautifully calm sky. And your soul finally rests. The exhausting need to always be ready to fly away softly fades, allowing you to stay perfectly still and feel completely secure. Not perfectly. You might still have moments where the old fears try to whisper, but you are finally learning how to just breathe gracefully through them. But honestly, your reflection is no longer distorted by anxiety and defensive walls. It is beautifully clear, genuine, and completely true to who you actually are. Without needing to hide, you unclench the tight fists that held onto your protective distance, letting your hands rest entirely peacefully in the warm, healing sunlight. Because safe love no longer feels impossible, his steadfast, gentle companionship proves that walking closely alongside someone does not have to end in devastating heartbreak, and fear slowly loses control. The heavy, dark storms of anxiety drift away like gentle clouds, leaving behind nothing but an enduring, perfectly tranquil peace. Your emotions become steadier. The volatile highs and lows of constant emotional survival beautifully give way to a perfectly balanced, grounded stability within your spirit. Your identity becomes clearer, stripped of the protective armor and the confusing fog of trauma. You can finally see the radiant, worthy person you have always been. And your heart no longer feels trapped. The invisible cage of isolation is completely gone, opening up into a boundless space where you can freely stretch out. Because healing creates true peace, the fragile, flickering spark inside you naturally grows into a confident, unwavering light that firmly anchors your entire emotional being. And peace teaches your heart trust again. Looking toward the future with his reassuring presence beside you, you finally realize tomorrow holds beautiful promise instead of pain. Little by little, your soul becomes entirely free. The deep wounds of the past are beautifully completely healed, making way for a vibrant, fearless, and wonderfully peaceful new beginning. Your heart was never meant to live trapped in a constant state of fear. You were not designed to spend your entire life hiding behind massive walls, anxiously waiting for the next painful disappointment to strike. It was brilliantly created for profound peace. Beneath all the heavy layers of past trauma and self-protection, your spirit was uniquely made to experience a deep, beautiful, and unshakable calm. For genuine, completely authentic connection, you were wonderfully designed to share your true self with others, freely giving and receiving unconditional love without the paralyzing dread of sudden abandonment. For true, absolute rest, you are meant to finally lay down the exhausting emotional armor you have carried for so many years and just exist, perfectly held and unconditionally safe. And slowly, little by little, your weary soul actually begins believing that again. The heavy doubt washes away entirely, replaced by a steady, comforting glow that reassures you it is finally okay to hope. Because Jesus absolutely never stopped staying near. Even when you pushed everyone else away and retreated into your darkest isolation, his faithful, calming presence remained steadfastly by your side. Even during your seasons of intense emotional distance, when you were convinced you were completely unlovable, his perfect grace was already stretching endlessly forward, preparing a beautiful path for your return. Even during your most paralyzing moments of fear, he gently guided you through the terrifying anxiety, helping you to look past the trauma and finally see a perfectly clear, restored reflection of yourself. The massive defensive walls you once relied on no longer define you. They have crumbled entirely, leaving you standing peacefully and courageously in the light, completely free from the need to hide. And that deep, heavy loneliness no longer controls your every decision. The vast emptiness has been completely filled with divine warmth, replacing your isolation with an everlasting sense of belonging. Because true spiritual healing profoundly changes how your heart sees life. Every potential connection is no longer viewed as a terrifying threat, but rather as a beautiful opportunity to share his gentle love. You finally stop simply surviving emotionally day by day. The frantic, exhausting urge to constantly protect yourself is completely gone, allowing you to walk calmly into a beautifully warm and promising horizon. And you finally begin truly living with profound peace. Stepping into the breathtaking sunrise of your new life, you realize that joy and connection are entirely safe to embrace once again. Because faith slowly, gently, and permanently restores the heavily guarded heart. Resting completely in his unconditional love, you are forever anchored in the absolute truth that you are fully seen and entirely safe. Maybe you were never difficult to love. All those years you spent convinced that you were too broken or too complicated were simply the heavy lies of trauma whispering in the dark. Maybe your heart was simply protecting itself. Every wall you built and every person you pushed away was just an exhausted, desperate attempt to keep your fragile soul completely safe. After carrying entirely too much pain, you bore the crushing weight of betrayal and rejection for so long that quiet isolation naturally became your only reliable sanctuary. Too much disappointment, every broken promise left an invisible mark, slowly draining your spirit until you simply had no more emotional energy left to risk hoping again. Too much emotional exhaustion, the constant vigilance required to navigate relationships finally overwhelmed you, making a quiet, lonely distance feel like the only way to survive. But Jesus understood every single hidden wound. While others may have judged your distance, he saw with perfect clarity the deep, agonizing fear that caused you to pull away. And he steadfastly stayed near your heavily guarded heart. He never forced his way in, but instead offered a gentle, enduring presence that proved his love was completely unconditionally safe, even while you fiercely struggled to trust. When you pulled away and retreated into the shadows, his perfect, steady light remained exactly where you left it, waiting. Because true emotional healing always happens slowly. There is no rush timeline for restoring a shattered heart. It is a delicate, ongoing journey of relearning how to accept love. Gently, the heavy, suffocating armor is beautifully dismantled piece by piece, not with harsh demands or pressure, but with the softest, most compassionate grace imaginable. Patiently, He is perfectly willing to stand with you in the quiet, completely honoring your pace until you feel entirely ready to step confidently forward into the light. Until peace finally feels entirely safe enough to stay, you no longer have to push the world away because your beautifully restored heart has found its absolute permanent home. You are not too distant to be loved. Even when you retreat into the farthest corners of your isolation, unconditional love is always patiently waiting to reach you. Your guarded heart is not beyond healing. No matter how deep the fractures or how heavy the emotional armor, complete and beautiful restoration is absolutely possible. Fear may have shaped your survival. It taught you how to build protective walls and navigate deep trauma just to keep your fragile soul intact. But it does not define your future. Those old patterns of anxious defense no longer have any power over the incredibly peaceful, boundless journey ahead. Because peace is slowly becoming stronger than fear, the quiet, gentle reassurance within your spirit is finally overpowering the loud, terrified voice of your past. And Jesus will gently stay beside your heart through every step of healing. You will never have to walk alone because His perfect love is your eternal refuge.